Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Well, my guest today is Husayn Allmart. Husayn was born in Chile and moved to the Midwest when he was 2. For one reason or another, he never quite left. He grew up and went to college in Illinois, volunteered on a reservation in South Dakota, then back to Illinois to work and raise a family. He and his wife, Suzanne, have 3 kids, a newly minted 18-year-old and twin 6-year-old boys. Husayn now works as a partner advocate at the Wayfarer Foundation. And in between preparing an unending buffet of snacks for his kids every day, he likes to binge TV and do embroidery. Husayn, it's so nice to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course. This is, well, it's always timely, I feel like, when I speak to you. We have a lot of the same cares and concerns about the world, and
Yeah.
you are on your own unique path in terms of offering your contributions and your service. So I'm happy to chat with you more and hear about your new insights.
Yeah.
And I know you're in a new capacity in terms of your day job, and I know that you are working with a variety of communities in terms of social justice and community building. Feel free to share whatever you'd like about the work and how it inspires you.
Yeah, it really does. Like, I kind of feel like I'm in a little bubble with kind of everything storming around. It's like I get to work with these amazing groups, and it's like it feels like such a blessing. And so I just started in January actually. So probably right after our last, kind of soon after our last our first interview.
Oh,
I think, right? Yeah.
yeah.
I
Maybe
can't remember when that was.
that was a couple of years ago, almost a year and a half now.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh. Okay. Okay.
Time has We've been very busy with
Yeah.
lots of new
Pandemic brain and stuff
endeavors.
like that. So I just started in January. So it's kind of new. Before that, I was at the Baha'i National Center in fundraising. So it's kind of like the other side now. The Wayfarer Foundation, it's relatively new. We're in our second year. It's a Baha'i inspired, which means it is operates according to Baha'i principles, but we work with all people, and most of the staff I'd say is not Baha'i. But our goal is to support organizations that are working for unity and peace. It's kind of broadly what we're working for. And then kind of within that, we're specifically looking for grassroots organizations that are in particular that are Black and Indigenous led, because those groups don't often get a lot of funding from foundations, especially if they're maybe a little bit more like working at the root level of issues. And then also, in particular, within that, Native-led organizations get like 0.3% of all foundation funding. So it's like criminally small amount of funding goes to Native-led organizations or organizations that serve Native people. So we're trying to correct that. And then personally, I feel like I get to support organizations that are creating the kind of world that I want to live in. So it's really amazing. Like I can't believe this is my job, So for example, like one organization that we just funded, it's a group of largely young Black and Brown people that, in the wake of George Floyd, a lot of cities were thinking that we should create some kind of alternative response system to people that are in crisis, an alternative to the police. So this group said, okay, we'll do it. And it's primarily young people, like I said, mostly Black and Brown. And they've created this really amazing organization where they said their main focus is that everyone that's in crisis should be met with love. And when people are in crisis, they need love and they also need assistance in repairing the relationships that are around them, especially if there's cases of abuse or violence or assault or things like that. So just this year, they've trained their first cohort of EMTs. They're like mental health folks that are trained in mental health and then also EMTs. And then they actually are working with another possible grantee that we're working with, and they've created an alternative crisis response. It's like a alternative dispatch. So instead of calling 111, if it's an issue of mental health, someone's having a crisis or they're unhoused or some kind of immigration status thing, you can call this number, and instead of a police officer or someone with a gun, you get someone that's specifically designed to help you with that issue. So I don't know. It's like I can't believe that we get to work with these organizations. Like I feel like that's just when I saw that organization said that they felt like everyone that's in crisis should be met with love, and then they need tools to help them, be in unity with the people around them. That's their language. I couldn't believe it. As a Baha'i, I feel like that's the kind of world that we're trying to build. And so it's really exciting that we get to support them.
That is really inspiring because I know I've heard of many conversations over, especially the last couple of years, about alternative approaches to
Mm-hmm.
crisis, injustice, or traumatic situations. And I know there have been ideas floated about having resources that are focused on mental health or more of the social advocacy resources to be tapped on more frequently for some of the emergency calls. And I've heard about this, and I didn't know that on the ground this was starting to sprout, and that there were organizations focused on bringing this into reality. So I appreciate the sort of the using the idea of love and justice and healing, taking those ideas and principles and then putting them into action, like actually saying, okay, let's take the next step and try and there'll be a lot of learning, no doubt. And I'm sure there are many, people involved in consulting on what's being learned and how to evolve the efforts. But the fact that it went from an idea or a concept or an intention to action, that's inspiring to me. I think, wow, people are really trying to make change. And it does start with the conversation. It does start with talking about the ideas of change, right? There is that intellectual exercise. Seems like the harder part is usually, in order to realize it, is the taking action. That's where things do sometimes not manifest. So I'm so happy to know that there are people and organizations that are really taking the action and putting the principles and the values they believe in into action in their community, and that there are foundations like yours that support them and provide the resources. So I appreciate this, and the fact that it's the work you're focused on through the foundation is using the principles of unity and peace. I think, okay, those are principles and ideas that I don't know if everywhere where people are doing advocacy or community building work, those principles are being put on the table and valued. And I think I wonder how that changes the spirit and the results of the work being done when the idea of unity and peace are added to the recipe, because those are such lofty ideas and they
Mhm.
sound so beautiful. And I think most people know what they mean in their essence, and
Mhm.
they may think that that's great, but like how, what is that really going to matter? Or how is that really going to play a part
Yeah.
in like getting the work done? I don't know what you think about that, but it's, to me, that's very striking that those principles can be kind of taken down from a abstract or lofty place and brought into everyday life, infused into everyday life, and actually maybe make for even more powerful transformation. I don't know
Mm.
what do you think?
Yeah, actually, as an organization, because this has been kind of a relatively new, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a pivot because it's not a huge change from what we were doing, but I think it's more being being aware of our intention that these are our goals to work with organizations that are building peace and unity. But yeah, so once we decided that, then it was like, yeah, what does that mean? But we're consciously, I feel like, and what the team is engaged in is yeah, what does that look like on the ground? And especially in organizations that, because one of the things we also try to do is support organizations that are spiritually oriented. Um, like they don't have to belong to a certain, religious tradition or anything, but it's like they have to hold at the center spiritual ideas about justice and unity and universal participation. But then, yeah, again, it's like, so what does that all mean, and what does that look like in practice? And especially, yeah, when organizations are kind of getting at the root of a lot of things and what it means to have justice and what it means to have like law and order. They're they're saying, what if we imagine a world where someone who's having like some kind of crisis isn't met with someone with a gun, but is instead met with love and compassion? And and then also, does that feel safe? I think, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, especially if they live in a place where I would say where police and ideas of law and order work for them, they're like, well, you can't do away with that. You need police. If someone's in crisis, you need someone with with a gun to go meet that crisis. But what this group and what groups are saying is, what if we imagine a world where everyone is met with love, um, but also we keep the community safe, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we take them and put them in a prison or a cage somewhere. And then even they go a step further and they say, what if we look at the root causes of why people are in crisis or why people commit crime? And what if we address that? You know? Um, and that's, I think for us, that's really what peace and unity means. It's not, we're going to take people that are having a problem and go put them in a jail somewhere. Like, that's not peace. Peace is like everyone has what they need so that crime isn't necessary. Like, why would you commit a crime if you have a job, if you have food, if you have a house, if you have access to arts and beauty and expression? Like, why would you commit a crime? That's personally, like, I feel like that's the world, like, as a Baha'i, like, we're trying to build too. So yeah, so we're really trying to look at that. Like, what does it look like, kind of boots on the ground? What does unity and peace look like without the fluff, or and but still able to have hard conversations?
That, to me, that just seems sensible and wise and practical. It's like meeting ideals or values with what's actually needed to transform
Yeah.
community, society. I think it seems like there's a lot to learn from these sorts of efforts and endeavors, right? Because for people who are willing to be a part of change, where there's a common vision for safer communities and neighborhoods, and where people are thriving and not just surviving, you know, not just kind of making it through every day, but where people are have what they need and are then able to make their most vital contributions, you know, to their families and communities. There's a lot to learn about what that endeavor looks like when you start to talk about community building and changing the paradigm. So I hope that people do, more and more people pay attention. I know that for your foundation, you're at the start of this journey, and all the organizations who are involved and who will be involved, I think are really, it's so important to have it's like an experiment, not to reduce it to that, but it kind of feels like a really a very
no, it is,
an important experiment, a vital experiment to see how can we do this, how can we make the change that most people want. And also I appreciate principles and values that are truly universal. That's why they're universal, because I think sometimes there's semantics and people get tripped up on, no, I'm not about that, or I'm not about that. But I think when there really is a heart-to-heart conversation, here's what I mean. Here's what I imagine when I think about justice, or when I think about peace, or when I think about love or unity. I think there really can be more conversation, meaningful conversation about what we're actually talking about when we use those words, so that people can get on they can maybe realize, oh, I am on the same page. I just didn't really know what you meant when you said unity. Like, what is that? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think those conversations are important. And I think the work that you all are doing, along with the organizations in these communities, can elevate those conversations, can spark those kinds of conversations, because it seems like most people probably want the same things when we're talking big universal values and guiding principles. Sure, everybody has the right to apply those to their lives in their own unique way, and what they feel is best for themselves and their families. But it seems like we need to get clear with each other about what we're actually talking about, so we're not tripping over semantics. And I think if those conversations were had more, people would realize, oh, okay, I do want what you're talking about. That is, I'm on board. Yeah, it may look different in terms of the way I apply it to my life, but yeah, I can get behind that. And then that just generates like that cooperative spirit, that collaborative spirit. And I think ultimately people can become unified when they realize we want our communities and our families and our society to get better. We want everyone to win, not just some people, whatever winning means, but thrive, I guess, is really the more powerful word. But it seems like this work that you're involved in really could be a catalyst for more meaningful conversation and creating a better understanding for what we're really all what we're all talking about when we say we want change and we want improvement. Just some thoughts I had real time.
It's interesting because we're a foundation that offers grants to organizations, and there's kind of a model for that. And we're trying to figure out, is that model healthy? Is that what leads to real change? And what does that look like for us to inspire or, to support real change? Because I think for a long time, foundations were kind of like just throwing out, like, here's some money for you, here's some money for you, come back to us with a report, and then that's it. I don't know, So, but now we're trying to, we're trying to think through, okay, so now we've offered we're trying to rethink the relationship between a grant offering organization and then organizations that receive grants, because I think for so long there's kind of an inherent power dynamic, because the grant making organization has what the organization wants. Like they need the money and the resources to keep going. And then for a long time, grant making organizations, foundations have been able to say, here are the hoops you have to jump through to get at what we have, And so we're trying to change that. We're trying to say, one, it's like, yes, this foundation has resources, but we're also very aware that while we have access to some resources, the organizations that we're working with and trying to partner with, they have access to a whole other range of resources: community knowledge, nonprofit management experience, especially with these organizations that are Native-led and Black-led. It's like they operate in a lot of different ways than, maybe traditional like white nonprofits, So, and it's not like we want to take that, like we don't want to have like a transaction, like we give you money and you give us knowledge or something. It's like, okay, so the grant is the first step in a relationship of us supporting them. And then we want to figure out, okay, now that we have this relationship, how can everyone benefit? How can other organizations that are working in the same issues benefit? Or if there's an established organization that we're working with, how can an organization that's just getting started benefit from that organization, and how can we facilitate that conversation and that learning? And actually, we just had a really powerful experience just a couple of weeks ago. We invited about 10 of our Native-led nonprofits to Chicago for 2 days. And kind of the anchor was to see the new Native American exhibit at the Field Museum, which it's really amazing. I really recommend it to everyone.
In the Chicago area.
Yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah. Because what they did is they had this old exhibit, I think that was from like the 50s or 60s or something like that, which was very much like Native Americans are in the past and here's what they used, here's what their life was like, kind of thing, And then they also had like sacred objects or objects that the curators didn't know enough about, so they would be upside down or facing the wrong way, or things like that. This is all stuff I just learned recently, But they created this new exhibit in consultation with over 100 tribal nations, and it's a mix of like old and new. The sacred stuff that should never have been on display, has either been repatriated, to the tribes that own them, or are being kept safe, within the Field Museum collections. But then also the family that is funding the Wayfarer Foundation, the primary funders, also were the primary funders for this exhibit. So we just thought it was like a natural kind of connection. So we invited these organizations, and it was incredibly powerful. Like I'm still kind of processing it. So that was really the anchor. And then we kind of felt like, okay, so we're inviting these organizations, a lot of whom don't know each other. But we also felt like it's not our place to set an agenda for what they should be doing or talking about. We kind of were like, okay, we'll bring you here for lunch and we'll provide food. And then here's 3 hours for you to use that space, that time and space, in the ways that you need. And the folks that came, there was about 30. It kind of grew as we picked up people along the way, But the people that came said it was really powerful because non-Native folks, especially foundations and funders, don't really ever provide that kind of space. They always tell them, here's what you need to be doing, or here's what we're doing now, and we're not going to allow for like Native input or practices or things like that. So like, for example, like one of the things that became apparent right away is that we didn't leave enough time for introductions. We scheduled about an hour and a half. And for me, I thought that would be plenty, because if you go to most meetings or gatherings, especially with kind of like in the white dominant culture, introductions are like, I'm Bob, I'm in accounting, it's great to be here, it's something like that. But these folks, they were sharing their clans. They were like, this is where I come from on my mother's side, this is where I come from on my father's side. Or they would share a bit of their creation story, or they would introduce themselves in their native language, and then and share their native name in their own language, and then they would speak in English. So it was like, that was like the first thing that was like, okay, we didn't provide enough time for introductions, because that's like one of the most important parts, so we had to actually carry it over. um, but then other times we also didn't provide enough time for ceremony. So for example, before we went into the field museum, everybody wanted to smudge and sing songs and kind of invite the ancestors in to come be with them. And they wanted to prepare themselves before going into the museum and seeing this exhibit. It wasn't just about, do I have my water bottle? Do I have my snacks and my walking shoes? I mean, there's that, but it was also like, are we right with each other? Are we right with our ancestors and the creator before we go in and experience this exhibit? And so it was just like a totally different way of doing things, And it's funny because the folks that came, our partners, they called it Indian time, which partly like they would talk about like, it just means we're late to everything, like the introductions ran late, so we were late for the next thing, and then we were late for lunch, like that kind of thing. But then what I realized that it also means that we take time. We take time to make sure everyone is in relationship with each other, and we know where we stand in terms of, who we are and what we bring to the table, and that we say prayers and we connect with the ancestors and God, before we go on to the next thing. It was just so profound. It was, it was really amazing.
That is, and it took me, I was delayed in understanding who the partners were who said Indian time.
Sorry. Yeah.
I thought those were like other foundations, and I was like, but then as you continued on, I said, oh no, I understand.
Yeah, our native
who those partners
yeah.
are, the indigenous. Yes. So they have every right to use that term. Okay. Wow. So much learning there.
Yeah.
And what you said, even there's so much I want to talk about in terms of this kind of latter part of what you shared about the day with the indigenous communities. But where you started, I believe, was talking about the model of foundations, and not that we have to delve deep into that, but I want to comment and say that I didn't know much about what that model looked like or has historically looked like. So I really appreciated you, without, putting it down so much as just saying, okay, this is the model. Maybe it's not so helpful. We're looking to, to evolve and to change it.
Everybody was trying.
That distinction is important. I didn't know that, I didn't realize that, I didn't understand the characteristics of how it was a little more transactional maybe, or has been traditionally, in terms of foundations and the grantees. And that to me raised the point, which you then spoke in real human terms about this recent experience, about who really is benefiting. What the benefit is ultimately for communities and tribes and people who are living their lives and who want to improve their lives and want to thrive. That's really what this work is all about. And so for a foundation to be removed from understanding on some level why this work is important, why their dollars are truly important. And it's not about the foundation, really. Like, unless people are actually from the foundation, like in your case, going out and connecting with communities and joining them in experiences, then if you're not doing that, I think, gosh, that is really going to be such a disconnect, and definitely the power dynamic will become very clear. And in the end, it's like, what is this all about? What is the point of this work? And that to me is I'm really grateful that your foundation is asking those questions about how you want to make your contribution and what's important, and ultimately, like, who has the power? Who has the real power? The dollars are powerful. I acknowledge that. But ultimately, if the people who are making use of the resources, are really the ones who know what's going to be best for their communities, and that's, to me, that's the real power. So I'd want to support that in the most loving, supportive, kind way. But it's exciting. It's exciting to hear about this new perspective, and I really appreciate the learning of this field museum experience with these tribes, because the culture, the human cultures that we have, need to be taken into consideration, right? The human, meaning, I think, indigenous, it's not necessarily national culture. It's not, I guess maybe ethnic, but I don't know if that's really accurate, but it's a culture, and it's indigenous culture is so diverse and unique to so many factors, location and so on and so forth. So that just speaks to, even though that's a very distinct kind of example, doesn't that apply to anywhere else? Right? If you're thinking of, like, I don't know, a city or a town or a neighborhood, like there is a culture there. I mean, again, kind of setting aside, and I don't want to say setting aside, because you can't remove, like, people's national culture if we're talking about America and they've come from other cultures or other nations, or but you sort of can also then say, what, my town has its own culture. And so wouldn't, like, people in my town, wouldn't it be best if we figured out what we want and what's going to be best for us? But acknowledging that there are all these kind of subcultures, or however we want to articulate it, that need to be taken into account. That seems very important. Right? Even a family. I mean, I think a lot about the influences in my own personal life. My family culture actually was very influential. And I'm not talking about, like, where my ancestors were from, or where my parents were born. They were both born in the States. But when I mean, like, family culture, I mean, like, how we came together as a family, how we dealt with problems, what we did to celebrate each other. Like, that is what influenced me way more than my ethnic national cultures. That's just me. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just sharing that was my experience growing up. Does that make sense? Seems like it's important that we all start to kind of get clear about, what is our culture? Like, what does that mean to my family, to my neighborhood, to my community, to my city, to my, reservation, whatever the demarcations are. That is very important to community building, and to your point, in terms of justice and in terms of honoring culture, that part of the equation is imperative to real change and transformation. That just gets whitewashed or just kind of neutralized, like, well, this is just kind of the formula. Let's just stick to the formula. I don't know. I don't think that real change happens that way.